2 months ago, I stood by and watched my wife, Lorraine, sell off my father's entire woodshop and the antique tools he'd spent a lifetime collecting. She took that $150,000 and gave it to our youngest son, Preston, to pour into a flashy tech startup that was destined to fail. They thought my father, Elias, lying in his sickbed, was too far gone to ever find out. They thought I, Arthur, was too weak to say a word. They were right about me, but they were dead wrong about my father. There are mistakes in life you can fix, but there are certain choices, especially those made by parents, that create a crack you spend the rest of your life staring into, wondering why you ever let it happen. If you've ever looked back on your past and felt that tight knot of regret in your chest, this story is for you. Hit the like button on this video and listen to the end, not to judge me, but to join me in discovering just how far a man can fall because of his silence, and whether there's any way back. It started on a Tuesday afternoon in April, the day the smell of sawdust and linseed oil in my father's workshop was replaced by a cold, sterile silence. I stood in the doorway, watching the movers dismantle everything. The heavy-duty planer he bought with his first big commission, the set of German carving chisels he treated like treasure. All of it was being loaded onto a truck like scrap. Lorraine stood nearby, arms crossed, her sharp eyes tracking every movement, making sure nothing was missed. She hadn't asked my opinion, she had simply informed me. "Preston needs the capital," she'd said, her tone as casual as if discussing the weather. "Your father would want to help his grandson build a future." I knew it was a lie. My father, Elias, a lifelong woodworker, believed in the value of his hands and the things born from patience. He despised anything flashy and fleeting. A startup for digital engagement optimization was the last thing he'd ever put a dime into. But I stayed silent. My silence had become a habit over 20 years of marriage to Lorraine. Preston, our youngest, came out and hugged his mother. He glanced at me, not with gratitude, but with a familiar look of dismissal. He was the golden child, the one into whom Lorraine had poured all her ambitions. And Silas, his older brother, the one who learned everything from his grandfather, the one with calloused hands and the soul of a true craftsman, was nowhere to be seen. He was at the hospital, sitting by my father's bed, reading him old books. They didn't know that I had already told my father. That very night, I sat by his bed, my voice trembling, and confessed everything. He said nothing, just took my hand. It was a weak grip, but it held an understanding and a resolve that I had lost long ago. My father's silent fury erupted from his sickbed just 3 days later. It didn't arrive in a storm of shouting. It came quietly, professionally, and far more cruelly. A thick manila envelope from the law firm of Jennings and Associates. I vividly remember Lorraine tearing it open with a dismissive smirk, assuming it was some minor paperwork. That smirk froze on her face as she read the first few lines. Preston, lounging on the sofa, scrolling through his phone, looked up at the change in his mother's expression. I was standing by the window, but I could feel the air in the room thicken. "What the hell is this?" Lorraine whispered. Then her voice rose to a snarl. "Arthur, what the hell is this?" She threw the documents onto the coffee table. I walked over and picked them up. It wasn't just a letter. It was a notarized copy of a legal instrument, an irrevocable trust established 5 years prior. The grantor, Elias Vance. The trustee, Harold Jennings, his attorney. And the sole beneficiary upon Elias's death, Silas Vance. Every asset was listed with cold, precise detail. This house, the one Lorraine boasted about to her friends as ours. The entire family construction supply business my father had built from nothing, which Lorraine and I currently managed. All of his investment accounts, everything. We owned nothing. We were merely permitted residents, living on the property by the grace of the true owner, my father, and soon, my eldest son. The letter from the attorney stated clearly that, as trustee, Mr. Jennings had a fiduciary duty to protect the trust's assets. The sale of the workshop and its contents without the owner's consent was an illegal disposal of assets. The $150,000 had to be returned to the trust within 14 days. Failing that, legal proceedings would commence. "The old man is insane," Preston shouted. "He's senile. Silas must have brainwashed him." Lorraine paced the room like a caged animal. "No," she hissed. "He's not insane. He's cruel. And so is your son, your precious firstborn." She turned to me, her eyes narrowed. "You knew about this, didn't you, Arthur? You sided with them against me and Preston." I didn't answer. This time my silence wasn't born of fear, but of a profound, chilling shock. My father had planned this. For years. He had seen everything coming. Lorraine's greed and my own cowardice. Instead of accepting defeat, Lorraine ignited a war I could never have imagined. She understood that the force of the law was, for the moment, unassailable. So, she aimed for something more fragile, but infinitely more venomous. Silas's reputation. Her first act of revenge wasn't waged with lawyers, but with keyboards and whispers. It began with a Facebook post that night. A picture of Lorraine and Preston, looking tired and heartbroken. The caption was a work of art, a masterpiece of manipulation. "My heart is broken to see my family torn apart by greed. My husband and I have worked our whole lives to build everything, only to watch a frail, elderly father being poisoned against his family by his own grandson. He signed papers he no longer understood. We only want what's best for Dad. But I guess our love can't compete with a calculated scheme. Please pray for our family in this difficult time." It spread like wildfire. Comments poured in. "That's horrific. Sending you so much love. I can't believe Silas would do that." Lorraine had skillfully painted the perfect picture. She and Preston were the victims. Elias was a pitiable, confused old man, and Silas was a greedy monster. She didn't stop there. She made phone calls to mutual friends, to longtime neighbors. Her voice would tremble, cracking with feigned sobs, as she recounted a completely distorted version of the story. "I just don't know what to do," she told Mrs. Miller from next door. "Silas won't even let us see him now. He's afraid we'll find out what he's done." It was a bald-faced lie. Silas was at the hospital around the clock, and it was Lorraine who hadn't visited my father once in over 2 weeks. But the lie worked. When Silas stopped by the house to pick up some clothes, Mrs. Miller gave him a cold look and turned away. A close friend from high school called and confronted him. He started getting angry texts from people he considered family. Lorraine was successfully isolating my son, turning him into an outcast in his own community. I witnessed it all. I read every comment, overheard every phone call. And I did nothing. A part of me told myself it would all blow over. But the other part, my dying conscience, knew I was complicit in a truly evil act. I was watching my son be crucified on a cross of lies, and I just stood there. The smear campaign was just the opening act. When it became clear that ruining Silas's reputation wouldn't change the ironclad terms of the trust, Lorraine escalated the fight to a new, ruthless and public level. She and Preston hired a prominent litigation firm in town, known for its aggressive tactics. A week after the first letter, a second one arrived. This time it wasn't from my father's attorney. It was an official notice of a lawsuit. Lorraine and Preston, as interested parties, had filed a petition in the county court to invalidate the entire trust. The grounds they cited were that my father, Elias Vance, lacked the mental capacity and was not of sound mind at the time he signed the founding documents. They alleged that Silas had exerted undue influence over his grandfather, taking advantage of his declining health to seize the family fortune. The petition also named me, Arthur Barnes, as a defendant, alongside Silas in the trust. Lorraine had put me in an impossible position. I was being forced to stand in a court of law and oppose my own son and my own father. "It's the only way, Arthur," she told me that night, her voice cold and calculating. "We have to prove to the judge that he wasn't himself. You're his son. Your testimony will carry weight. You have to be on your family's side." Family? The word almost escaped my lips. Is Silas not family? Is Dad not family? But I swallowed the words. Fear had its grip on my throat. The legal battle began. The lawyers' fees started piling up. Our lives became a blur of meetings, depositions, and endless paperwork. Lorraine's lawyer demanded a competency evaluation from my father, a move that Jennings fiercely opposed, arguing it was cruel and unnecessary for a man in the final stages of his life. The court ordered a compromise, an official video deposition. It was bitter. We were no longer a family, but two opposing sides in an invisible courtroom. Lorraine and Preston prepared for the fight like sharks smelling blood. They gathered gossip from neighbors, trying to find any anecdote of my father being forgetful. They subpoenaed his medical records. And I was trapped in the middle, called upon by Lorraine's lawyer to give testimony against my own father. They wanted me to recount times he forgot a name or seemed tired. They wanted me to twist the signs of old age and illness into proof of insanity. I was standing at a fork in the road. On one path was my wife and youngest son. On the other, my father and my eldest. And I, in my deepest cowardice, didn't know which way to turn. The deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday. They couldn't bring my father to the courthouse, so the courthouse came to him. The small hospital room, usually filled only with the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor and the rustle of Silas turning a page, was now crowded. A court-appointed official, two legal teams, a stenographer, and a video camera on a tripod aimed directly at my father's bed. Lorraine and Preston sat on one side, their faces tense with anticipation. Silas and I sat on the other. I couldn't bring myself to look my son in the eye. My father, Elias, was propped up on a stack of pillows by a nurse. He was gaunt, his skin pale, but his eyes were as clear and sharp as the edge of his favorite chisel. He scanned the room, his gaze lingering on me for an extra second, before settling on the camera. Lorraine's lawyer began, his voice syrupy but laced with venom. "Mr. Vance, can you tell us what day it is?" "It's Tuesday, May 16th, my father answered, his voice weak but clear. "And can you tell us where you are?" "St. Jude Hospital, room 402, the place I'm waiting to die." His bluntness made the lawyer pause. He continued with a series of questions designed to confuse him, to prove he was addled. He asked about events from decades ago, about complex business details. My father answered them all, calmly and accurately. Finally, the lawyer got to the heart of the matter. "Mr. Vance, 5 years ago, you signed a document creating a trust, transferring your entire estate to your grandson, Silas Vance. Do you recall this?" "I remember it perfectly," my father said. "It was one of the wisest decisions I ever made." "And why would you do that? Why would you disinherit your own son, Arthur, and your grandson, Preston?" This was the moment Lorraine had been waiting for. She leaned forward in her chair. My father let out a long, rattling cough, then took a deep breath. "I wasn't disinheriting anyone," he said, and his voice was no longer weak. It was hard as oak. "I was protecting my legacy from those who don't appreciate it. I created that trust after I watched my son's wife, Lorraine, treat Silas like an afterthought in his own home. I heard her mock his dream of becoming a woodworker. I watched her pour all her money and attention into Preston, a boy who was taught that anything worth having can be bought. And I saw my son, Arthur, stand by and do nothing. He turned his head and looked directly at Lorraine. "You sold my workshop to fund a fantasy. You thought I wouldn't know, but I knew. I've known what kind of person you are for a long time, Lorraine. This trust wasn't the act of a senile old man. It was the act of a father and a grandfather trying to fix his own son's mistake, and to protect the only grandson who understood the value of real work." The room was utterly silent. His testimony was a gavel strike, shattering their entire case. 2 days later, my father passed away in his sleep. My father's testimony was a fatal blow. The video, with his undeniable clarity and resolve, destroyed the entire foundation of the lawsuit. Lorraine's lawyer called her the next morning, advising her that they no longer had a case, and that she should withdraw the petition to avoid further public humiliation and catastrophic legal fees. The lawsuit was dropped. There was no trial, no verdict, just the quiet admission of defeat. The news spread quickly. The neighbors and friends who had looked at Silas with suspicion now began to understand the truth. Their silence now was one of embarrassment. Lorraine and Preston had lost, publicly and shamefully.
My father's legacy was secure, just as he had intended. But the victory felt hollow. It left only an empty, bitter taste. According to the terms of the trust, the house was now fully under Silas's control. Mr. Jennings sent us a formal notice. He didn't kick us out immediately. Silas wouldn't allow it. Instead, we were required to sign a temporary lease agreement for a symbolic rent of $1 a month, valid for 6 months, to give us time to find a new place. It was an act of grace from Silas, but for Lorraine, it was the ultimate humiliation. To pay rent in the house she once ruled. She signed the lease with a look of pure hatred on her face. The atmosphere in the house became suffocating. Lorraine and Preston barely spoke to me, communicating only in glares and slammed doors. They saw me as a traitor for not perjuring myself on their behalf. I started trying to talk to Silas. I knocked on his door a few times. "Silas," I'd say, "can we talk for a minute?" The first time he didn't answer. The second time, he called out, "I have nothing to say, Dad." His voice was cold and distant. The grief of losing his grandfather and the betrayal by his family had built a fortress around him. I had helped build that fortress with my years of silence, and now I had no idea how to breach its walls. Every day, I'd walk past my father's empty workshop. The space, once so full of life, was now filled only with dust and regret. I realized we hadn't just lost a lawsuit. We had lost a family. And I, more than anyone, was responsible for the wreckage. I thought that after the public and humiliating failure of the lawsuit, Lorraine would finally accept reality. I was wrong. Her hatred didn't fade. It just transformed, becoming more subtle and venomous. When she couldn't attack the physical legacy my father had left, she decided to attack Silas's future. This was her second revenge, a covert war, fought not in a courtroom, but with carefully planted lies. Silas, after weeks of grieving, began to pull himself together. He wanted to pursue his and his grandfather's shared dream, to open his own workshop for custom, handcrafted furniture. He had the skill, a small amount of capital from a savings account his grandfather had left him, and, most importantly, the passion. He started drawing up plans, looking for a small commercial space to rent, contacting suppliers of rare woods, and sketching out his first designs. He was full of hope. And that's when Lorraine made her move. She was a skilled networker with extensive contacts in the local business community from her years of co-running the company. She began to use that network not to help, but to sabotage.
I first noticed it when I overheard one of her phone calls. She was talking to a Mr. Henderson, the owner of the region's largest lumber yard, whom Silas had a meeting with. "Oh, Henderson." Lorraine's voice was sweet as honey. "I heard my Silas reached out to you. He's a talented boy, but, bless his heart, since his grandfather passed, he's not been very stable emotionally. Unreliable, you know. I'd hate to see him get in over his head with a big order. I'm just worried about him, you know?" She ended the call, and I knew Silas's meeting was doomed. It was. A few days later, a dejected Silas told me Mr. Henderson had abruptly cancelled. Then came the real estate company, where Silas was eyeing a rental space. Lorraine had a friend who worked there. Soon, that space was suddenly leased by another party. A potential client who had loved Silas's drawings went silent and stopped returning his emails. Lorraine was quietly strangling my son's career before it could even begin. She spread her toxic rumors, painting a picture of an unstable, unreliable young man. She was turning my son's passion into a joke, a failed project. She did it all discreetly, under the guise of a concerned mother. The viciousness of it was chilling. I watched Silas grow more and more frustrated, his confidence eroding. He couldn't understand why every door seemed to be slamming in his face, and I, once again, knew the truth, but stood silently in the shadows, a quiet accomplice to the crime. The final straw broke on a Thursday night. Lorraine was out at her book club meeting, one of the many venues she used to sow her stories. Preston was out with friends. The house was unnervingly quiet. I sat in my home office, trying to go over the company ledgers, but I couldn't focus. The image of Silas's frustrated face haunted me. He'd just been denied a line of credit from a tool supplier, despite his pristine financial history. I knew Lorraine's hand was in it. An impulse I couldn't explain drove me to do something I hadn't done in 20 years. I opened Lorraine's laptop. She never used a password, always confident that I was too afraid to ever breach her private world. Tonight, my anger and curiosity outweighed my fear. I opened her email client, and there it was, in her sent folder. Everything. The emails to her business contacts. "Just a friendly heads up, Mark, my boy is going through a rough patch. Wouldn't want you to get tangled up in it." Another to a real estate agent. "Thanks for letting me know about Silas's inquiry. Just tell him the space is gone. I owe you one." There were even Facebook message threads, conversations she had deleted from her phone, but were still archived on her computer. It was a clear, undeniable record of a systematic campaign of sabotage. I sat there, reading line after line, and a cold dread washed over me. This was no longer the anger of a mother who felt she'd been wronged. This was pure malice. She was willing to destroy her own son's life just to satisfy her vengeful spirit. In that moment, something inside me finally shattered. It was the silence, the cowardice, the image of myself I had tried to maintain. I realized my silence wasn't keeping the peace. It was complicity. I had enabled this evil by doing nothing. I couldn't stand by anymore. I couldn't let her destroy what was left of Silas. Very calmly, I began forwarding every email, taking screenshots of every message. I sent them all to my own email address. I collected every piece of evidence, organizing it into a single folder. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew one thing for certain. I could not be silent anymore. It was time to choose, and this time, I wouldn't choose wrong. I waited 2 days. I needed my rage to settle, to harden into something more solid. Resolve. I wanted my actions to be a conscious decision, not a fit of rage. I called Lorraine and Preston into the living room on Saturday evening. "We need to have a serious talk," was all I said. My tone must have been different, enough to make them sense something was wrong. When they were seated on the sofa, across from my armchair, I didn't waste any time. I placed my tablet on the table. The screen lit up, displaying the first email. "I've read them, Lorraine," I said, my voice terrifyingly calm. "All of them. The emails to Henderson, to Mark, to the real estate agent. The messages, too." The color drained from Lorraine's face, her expression shifting from curiosity to shock, then to pale horror. Preston looked from his mother to me, utterly confused. You went through my things," Lorraine stammered, trying to deflect. "Yes," I admitted without hesitation. "And I saw how you have been systematically trying to ruin our son's life. You didn't just try to take his inheritance. You are actively trying to take his future." I swiped through the screens, one piece of evidence after another. Preston stared at the floor. It was clear he hadn't known the extent of his mother's actions. But Lorraine, after a moment of panic, found her defiance. "I was protecting this family," she shrieked. "Protecting it from a son who turned his back on us." "Protecting?" I stood up. For the first time in years, I felt taller than her, and not just physically. "You call sabotaging a man's business protecting him? You call spreading vicious lies protection? No, Lorraine, that isn't protection. That's revenge. And it ends. Right now." I looked her straight in the eye. "I'm giving you two options. Option 1. You and Preston will pack your things and be out of this house in 48 hours. Out of my life and out of Silas's. And we will be done." "And the second option?" she asked, her voice dripping with scorn. "The second option," I said slowly, "is that I send this entire folder to Jennings's law firm. With this evidence, Silas could sue you for defamation and tortious interference. And I'll also send a copy to the police. I'm not sure what they'll do, but I have a feeling they'd be very interested in this kind of conspiracy." Silence filled the room. Preston looked at me with terror in his eyes. He had never seen me like this. Lorraine stared at me, her eyes a battle between fury and the dawning realization that she had, finally, lost. She had miscalculated me. She thought I would be a doormat forever. "You wouldn't dare," she whispered. "Try me," I replied, my voice solid as stone. In that moment, I knew our family, as it had existed, was truly over. And I was the one who had finally ended it. They were gone in 36 hours. There were no more arguments, just the heavy silence of suitcases being dragged across the hardwood floors, and the final, definitive slam of a car door. I stood at the window and watched Lorraine's car disappear down the street. And I felt nothing. Not relief, not joy, not even sadness. Just a vast, hollow emptiness. My father's house was now eerily quiet. Lorraine's loud, oppressive presence was gone, but the silence she left behind was not peaceful. It was the silence of ruin. I had lost a wife, and I had lost a son. But the truth is, I had lost them a long time ago. I was only now admitting it. I began to clean up. Not just the house, but my life. I took all the evidence I had gathered to Silas. I didn't explain much. I just put a USB drive on his desk and said, "You should see this, so you understand why they're gone." Then I left, giving him his space. A few days later, he came to me. For the first time in months, he sought me out in my office. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, looking at me. In his eyes, I didn't see forgiveness, not yet, but I saw a flicker of understanding. The cold anger had been replaced by a deep, profound sadness. "Thanks, Dad," he said softly. Just 2 words, but they carried immense weight. It wasn't a thank you for my final act, I think, but an acknowledgement of a shared pain. That evening, for the first time since my father's death, we ate dinner together. It was a quiet meal, but it wasn't the suffocating silence of before. It was the silence of two men beginning to learn how to be in a room together again. My journey of atonement has only just begun. I know that one right action cannot erase 20 years of wrong. I'm not trying to become a perfect father overnight. I'm just trying to be present. I go to his workshop, not to give advice, but to sweep sawdust. I listen when he talks about his struggles finding new suppliers. I don't offer platitudes. I just listen. Slowly, the walls are beginning to come down. Not with grand apologies, but with small, consistent actions. I don't know if we will ever be what we once were. Probably not. The scars will always be there. But maybe we can build something new on the wreckage. A relationship based on truth, no matter how painful. And on a slowly, carefully rebuilt respect. I am no longer a husband. I'm not sure I'm even a father in the truest sense of the word. I'm just a man, living alone in his own father's house, trying every day to be worthy of the legacy he fought so hard to protect. So, that's my story. A family broken, a wife gone, one son lost, and a father trying to pick up the last remaining shards of his dignity. I know many of you listening will think, it served him right. Why did he let it get so bad? And you're right. I'm not telling you this to get sympathy or to make excuses for my cowardice. I'm telling it as a confession and as a warning. The key element that destroyed my family wasn't Lorraine's greed or Preston's entitlement. It was my silence. Silence, when used to avoid conflict, to maintain a false peace, becomes the soil in which evil grows. It enables injustice, it nourishes tyranny, and in the end, it poisons everyone, including the one who remains silent. I thought I was keeping my family together, but in reality, I was just delaying an inevitable explosion and making the blast radius that much larger. The lesson I had to learn at such a terrible cost is this. Protecting the people you love sometimes means not shielding them from the truth, but having the courage to face the truth with them, no matter how hard it is. Thank you for listening.